and then because we almost knew what the insights are, where the processes are, so it made a very natural sort of like a fit for my team to actually start to develop the performance improvement skills. But as we started through the journey, so if you look at the diagram there, so we were doing the lower bit of the diagram, which is all about the insights and analysis. So the question that we had at that point was like, should we just go with the traditional process improvement, or can we do something better? And I think the timing was very good, because at the same time, we started to see the RPA start to come onto the scene, and it was almost on the forefront, and lots of organizations were looking into the process automation. So that made really good sense for us, that now that we are going into this whole PI journey, we should actually embed the automation as part of the journey from day one. And yes, then we can do the intelligent automation over the time. So we chose from day one that yes, we will be doing performance improvement, the process redesign and all those things, but wherever possible, we will be using the RPA to actually automate the tasks or the decisions wherever possible. But we wanted to create a more effective human and technology partnership, that wherever the tasks can be automated, the decision can still be left to the human for the QA, or if the decision is mature enough, we will let the technology take the decision for us. But one of the, I would rather say, a misperception a lot of people had was that, as we start to go up in the hierarchy in terms of the process improvement or automation or intelligent automation, then we may not need a lot of humans or the collaboration to happen. They believe that the bots are going to do all these things for us. But from day one, we were very clear that the stakeholder engagement, the collaboration is absolutely critical. Doesn't matter whichever level of performance improvement you're doing, whether it's a traditional or automation or intelligent automation, the stakeholder engagement is critical for the success of these programs. And it's the humans who come together who actually give us the insights on their processes, the rules and the data, what sits behind these processes. So that was very much set up front, very clearly within the organization. Yes, the automation doesn't mean that we are going to reduce the collaboration. In fact, the more automation, the higher the degree of automation, the higher the stakeholder engagement has to be there to make sure that we generate the success. So that's where the journey started, and that's how we embedded the automation into the performance improvement. Mohit, can we go to the next slide?
Yeah. So, Harpreet, as you go to the next slide, I also want to understand the demography of our audience today, like at what stage of their journey they are in the RPA. So, can I just launch one poll, and we can discuss the outcome of that poll, which will also let us know what should be the agenda for today's discussion in terms of the theme. So, audience, we have opened the poll. So we want to understand at what journey you are, what stage of journey you are in the RPA, which will help Harpreet to modify his discussion and point of discussion during today's webinar. Harpreet, you can see that in front of yourself, that what questions we have asked about 4 stages: rule-based, statement-based, index-based, and AI-based. So I'm now closing the poll in less than 10 seconds. So here is the results. So Harpreet, your expert comments on this, outcome?
I would say that it very much aligns with what I would have thought. The most of the automation is around the rule-based. So that's what the audience has said, like around 50% of the organizations are, or the 50% of the participants here on this webinar, they are saying that the automation is more about, or what they've been doing is more around the rule-based. It's only 15% which is judgment-based, and 15% is around the AI-based, and 23% analytics-based. So that's sort of like aligns with my thinking too. We have been looking into things more around the rule-based, and some of the things that we have been looking at are around the analytics-based. So which I would say the results don't surprise me, and that's what we have been doing too. And then there will be some examples in today's webinar, which we will be covering things around the rule and the analytics-based use cases from what we have been doing.
Yeah, I think you're right. You can see this twice the amount of people who are doing rule-based and analytics. So you can see that people are taking the next step to move towards the next phase of RPA maturity level. So Harpreet, I'll just move to the next slide. Thank you for your expert comment. So here is next slide for you.
So as we started to really think through this whole thing, like a couple of years ago when we started the journey, and we said, okay, we have to now bring the automation embedded into this whole performance improvement journey, we really started to think that what are the challenges with this? Because if the performance improvement is very traditional, if it's all very still the tasks are being done manually, it's a different thought process. But the moment we introduce automation, no, it's a different thought process that we have to bring into the play, and we have to start to think of what challenges are we going to face through the journey, and what sort of capabilities we can develop upfront to really start to help us provide more transparency around these automation capabilities or around the processes and all those things. So one of the things that we really thought through upfront was we really created this concept of bot as a human. So as we are all aware of the HR process that we go as humans when we have to join an organization. Any organization will first design the process or the position description, then candidates apply for it, and then we shortlist the candidates, and the candidate that we select, we collect a lot of data about that candidate, like what qualifications they have done, what experience they have got, and then what exactly are they going to come when they come to us. And once they are with us, we do a regular sort of the performance sort of evaluation of those employees every 6 months or every 1 year, depending on the organization we are in. So similarly, we developed the whole concept for the bot, but it's not only the concept in terms of like, how the bot comes into play, or once bot goes live, what the bot is doing, and then we do the regular audit of the bot. So it's not only concept on a paper, we actually designed the whole metadata model behind the scenes so that we can start to collect a lot of information about the bot, of what the bot is doing, because that we thought was really, really critical for us to create the transparency that, how as a manager I can come into the office today and ask my team that what have you done yesterday, what is the status of my work, which processes has been done, how much. It will be the same issue once we start to create the digital workforce. The managers will want to have that sort of transparency around the processes. So that's the first concept we developed, that we want to collect that metadata about the bot, and that's where we actually developed the whole model behind the scene, where we store some of the static data about the model upfront, or about the bot upfront, like what the bot is going to do, what sort of process it is going to get involved. And then on the ongoing basis, the bot is actually inputting the data into the model itself on the daily basis to say, this is exactly what I've done. These are the tasks I've done, these are the steps I've done, this is where I'm failing, this is where I'm more successful. So the model is actually having some static, but some runtime information, inputted by the bot itself. So that was, once we developed that concept, then we started to work upon like how we can create more transparency even for our technology landscape. For example, now the bots started to deal with lots of the applications from the front end, and then we all know that the applications can change quite frequently nowadays. Every 3 months, every 6 months, the application vendors are coming with their upgrades or the new releases or the patches or whatever we want to call them. Now we thought through it, the process end to end. We understood that could be a challenge for my IT colleagues, that how do they understand which bot is interacting with what application, what screens my bots are touching, and we didn't want to create a whole cumbersome process for the impact analysis for the IT colleagues. So as part of the model, we started to store the information within the metadata model itself. Just on the previous screen, Mohit, if you can stay on the previous one. Yeah, this one. So we started to collect the metadata about what screen or what application the bot is actually really going and touching. So on the screen, it's all the sample data, but you can see there's the name of the application, there's the name of the screen that the bot goes and really does the job with. So whenever there's a whole roadmap from the vendor, like these are the upgrades they're going to come up with. So my IT colleagues or someone in my team can go into this report and see that, is this really going to impact my bot? And if yes, then we work through with the project team to make sure when the new release comes, the bots have been updated, and then we go with the upgrade within the bot world too. So that there are some of the challenges we really started to work within. The moment we thought that yes, automation is going to be part of the performance improvement, this is the level of transparency we need to create. If you now go to the next one, Mohit, if you go to the next screen. So the next challenge for us was like, how do we now create some sort of like the audit process for the bot? Like, how do I know within every 3 months or 6 months that bot is still doing what it was meant to do? So we created this whole bot audit process and all the templates that came along with it. But this is where we sit with the process owner every 6 months, and then we make sure that the business rules are still relevant. The credentials of whatever the bot is using to log into the different applications, they haven't lapsed. The connectivity is still there, or we're not hard coding any tasks within the bot, or there's the key documentation is still up to date, or there are no new compliance requirements from the government or other authorities, or there's no other changes to the other processes within the organization that impact this process. So we actually created that whole audit process upfront to make sure that once we have this whole digital workforce up and running, we've got 15, 20, 50 bots, when the scale goes up, we don't run up into these issues where we don't understand what my bots are doing on day-to-day basis. So that's almost like the last bit of that whole process of bot maintenance, where we actually go and do the audit every 6 months, and we actually get a sign off from the stakeholders that they agree that everything is in place, and then the bots are doing what they were meant to be doing.
So, Harpreet, what were your drivers to automate this analytics function?
Or you mean that? I think the driver was more about actually enhancing the analytics function to actually also start to look into the performance improvement type activities too. And the reason I think we were really, as I mentioned in the start itself, because my team was producing all the analytics, we were getting all the insights. We also knew where the data quality issues were happening. We also knew, once the report was generated, that where the process issues are within the organization. So that's what almost drove us to really get into that performance improvement space, because we could see from the position we had in the organization, we could see that a lot of the insights are not getting actioned, and we're getting the same issues over and over the time. And given that we were already involved very deeply with the data, we were very closely working with the stakeholders across the organization, the business owners, the system owners. So that's what drove that sort of, the natural progression of the analytics team to now look into the automation. Yes, that helped over the time. We've also automated some of the analytical functions within our own domain, but primarily we are working to automate processes across the organization. Does it give you the answer?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Harpreet. It's very valid answer you've given to us. Can I ask you one more question? That have you also used automation to cleanse the data, underlying data on which insights are derived on?
So one of the key things within our organization always has been that, it's not documented as a policy or something, but as a principle within the business, we have always agreed that the data cleansing, the data quality should happen at a source itself. So yes, we do find all the data quality issues, but we document them, and then we work with the business owner to resolve them at the source level. So we're not using automation or the bots to actually cleanse the data on the fly, because then the issue will be, it's only being improved as part of the process or as part of the automation, but the source still has the data quality issues. So we normally try to go back to the source and fix the issues at the source level. And as part of the presentation today, I'll actually try to cover some of those aspects too. That why do we go to the source level to actually fix the data quality issues, not within the automation itself. But it is a big part of our whole journey, fixing the data and then making sure we have all the right pieces of data before we get into the automation. Are we going to the poll? Mohit?
Hello, sorry, I was just on mute. So, thank you for your answer. And why I asked this question was, most of the client where we go for automation, the quality of data, the source data is not optimal. And the first instance, they ask us to help us to clean their data. And we use automation there to clean the data because it happens fast, and it is all the human effort get automated. And In the meantime, I've also launched another poll, to understand have the audience tried automating the analytics in the organization? And I'm just closing the poll and sharing the result with you. Harpreet, your expert comments on this.
That's almost like a 40% saying yes and 60% no. It's almost, I take that as a almost equal split, given that we've got 23 people here. It's almost like an equal split here. But I think it's more or less, it depends on your own processes. If you already have an existing process to improve the data quality, for example, because we were already looking into the analytics of the organization, we already had established processes to improve the data quality. We already had very good relationships with the business owners and system owners, and then we could work with them to improve the data quality. So we just use the same channels or the processes even for the automation. Although now we're looking into some tools for the data quality and how we can even automate that aspect, independent of the RPA itself. We are looking into those sort of things. But till date, whatever processes we had in place that have been helping us to drive the data quality for RPA too. But yes, we had massive issues. Some of the processes we had to spend a couple of months primarily on the data quality before we came onto the automation or the process improvement. So it is an issue, but we were able to work it through without using automation. People were helpful and they really helped us to improve the data quality at a system level.
Great. Thanks, Harpreet, for your insight. So now to session 3, integration of automation analytics. Harpreet, take it from here.
Okay. Thanks, Mohit. So this is, if you go to the next slide. So once we started to really get into the journey, like once we had thought through the whole process of, okay, yes, that's what we want to do. We really want to introduce automation in there. We really want to go through the process improvement journey. One of the things that we always, or at least I always thought was like in the digital world, the performance improvement is nothing different to analytics, or they're at least they're very tightly integrated. But both of them are highly, highly dependent upon the data availability, the data quality, the digitization of the information and all that stuff. So the first thing we did, we actually developed this whole method or a framework or whatever you want to call it, but I would rather call it I call this thing as a decision maturity framework. I believe that in the corporate world, we are coming here to actually make decisions based on the data that is available within the systems. For example, can I give the student the admission into this course, or can we give loan to this person? This is someone who is in the bank is thinking about who is the right person I can give the loan to, or is this person really fit to get the loan, and can they actually service the loan for next 30 years? Or in the insurance world, the decision could be about, can I really give this person the insurance on this premium for these many years or whatever? So we are here to actually make the decisions based on the information that we are gathering from the customer, or based on the information that we are collecting within our operational processes. So the information becomes the most critical part to actually make sure that our decisions are of good quality and they're consistent across the number of people who are actually taking the decision, or the same decision. For example, for admissions, we may have, 20 or 30 staff. They're all taking the decision around admissions. But how do we make sure they're all consistent? So we need to make sure that we're collecting the right information, and then we are able to process the information in the similar way so that we are consistent in our approach. So we sort of agreed the most critical foundation for any of these programs is the availability of data. The better the data, the more processed the data, the better it is going to be in terms of informing our decisions and improving our automation or improving our analytical capabilities. The other key thing that we've realized for the foundation, from the foundational point, was the flow of the data within the different systems. So there should be some channel, whether you call it integration, whether you call it enterprise service bus, or whatever mechanisms are available within the organization. There should be something that allows the data flow within the different systems to go from one end to another end. And more automated those data flows are, the better your foundation for the insights and the task automation or the decision cognition. So that was, and then we started to look at the processes more from the decision point of view. We still call it as a process improvement, but when my team is actually going and looking at a process, we are really thinking through the decisions that are being made in the process, what information do we need to collect for that decision, and then how do we actually bring some insights and automate those tasks that enable the decision in the end. So if you go to the next slide, Mohit, so that will help us to explain this foundation in a bit more detail. So that's where the foundation for the data flow and availability, the key thing is the data quality. Because one thing I normally say is that if you don't look at the data quality, and if you're, really, if the data quality is shit, the automation is just going to make sure that your shit is getting delivered at a faster rate. That's what the automation is doing. So we really need to be very serious about the data quality. And I think the RPA, one of the biggest benefits I see with the RPA, that it has brought the data quality into the forefront. With the analytics or reporting, people can still ignore the data quality, because at the end of the day, what we are producing is a report, and then people will know where the data quality issues are, and they may make the decision based on their understanding of where the data quality issues are. But with the automation, you have no choice. The data has to be accurate, because the bots are actually moving your data from one end to another end, and they are actually automating the tasks. And one of the key things that we have to keep in mind with the automation is that we can't roll back. How in database world, there's a concept roll back the transactions. In the automation world, we have done the transaction, we can't roll back. So that's why the data quality becomes absolutely key to whatever we are wanting to do within the analytical and the automation world. So yes, I think I believe personally that the automation has helped us to improve the data quality in many places within the organization, and we'll go through some of those examples of where we have been able to actually really improve the data quality. And once we improve the data quality, it's not only my process or where I was automating the things was benefited. There were far more other processes within the organization that we never even thought of. They started to get the benefit once we really had a solid foundation around the data quality or data flow or data availability. So once that is done, once we have really worked on these two key foundational aspects, then if you go to the next slide, Mohit.
So coming to data quality, Harpreet, do you define data quality only of the internal world in ECU or also including the external world outside ECU, the source of data?
See, till date, most of the data that we have been collecting from the outside has been all the benchmarking data from the government or some other organizations sharing the data with us. But normally we can't change it, because we have to believe in what that benchmarking data is. We can't tweak it or what we think the data has to be. But primarily our focus has been improving the data quality inside the organization itself within our own systems. So we haven't actually worked on any scenario where we have actually really gone and improved the data quality on the external sort of the thing or the external data sources. But we have the example, and I will share that example today, where improving the data quality on our side has actually benefited the stakeholders outside the university.
Okay. Thank you very much, Harpreet.
So once we have worked on the data quality or the data availability and making sure that we have got all the right pieces of digital or right pieces of information being digitized, because one of the things that we also realized in this space was that we were not collecting all the relevant information into the source systems. So if I need 20 pieces of data to make a decision, in some cases we were only collecting 12, in some other cases we were collecting 14. So one of the things my team then also does is work with the system owners to actually do the system improvements and make sure that we are collecting all those 20 pieces of data elements, because then only we can actually make sure that my decision is consistent among all the people working within the process. Because if you're not even digitizing those 30% of the data elements, then that 30% of the decision is being made on the gut feel. And that's where you start to see the variation within the decision making based on the similar information. People are actually making the decision to be very different. Once all of that is done, then we start to work on within the process what things are only about the insight automation. In our experience, most of the times people are actually spending time to only get the information from different systems and create a report or create an invoice or create some document. So and that by itself could be very, very time consuming process. So once we understand, or once all the information has been cleansed and it is within the source systems, then we start to look at what insights do we need to generate for the stakeholders, and then that by itself can bring 30 to 40% of the efficiency within that decision itself, because now people are not wasting time manually collating the data. They are actually getting those dashboards in Tableau, or the information is coming in the email to them, and then all they're going to do is now make a decision as opposed to spending time on collating the information. So we try to automate that as much as possible. Once that is done, then we look at what other tasks are left now. Like, are the users actually sending those reports or invoices or all those things to the other stakeholders through email, or what can now be really, really done to automate those tasks that people are actually doing manually. And then over the time, we are hoping that we can then, once the information is all in there, we can also then start to look into the cognitive side of the decision, where the decision can be made by the technology itself. Whereas for now, we are just trying to automate the tasks. And at the decision point, we give the choice to the human, or there's a touch point with the human to make sure everything has been done in the right order, and human still makes a decision, and then the technology is being used to automate the repetitive tasks underneath. But the vision is that in future we should be able to move into that cognitive part of the decision once we have seen that yes, we have been very accurate over the time, the bots are actually giving us the right information. Then we can do some analysis to prove that in these decisions we can actually now really, really rely on the technology, and we can let the technology make these decisions for us in the future. Does it make sense, Mohit?
Great. Makes sense. I think that it's quite structured way of automating the structured way of automating the decision-making part. So you have mentioned a lot of analytics tools in your this slide in particular. So I want to launch one more poll in which I want to ask the audience what type of tools they are using currently in their organization for analytics. R, W, Power BI, Excel, or they've outsourced the whole analytics function. Harpreet, what are your views, like not from ECU perspective, but from your experience, how these tools are being used by various organizations, and what are your views on them?
I think the Tableau, Power BI, I'm seeing that they're being, a lot of organizations are, using one or the other. Either it's the Tableau or Power BI. They are very much similar on their capabilities. So they are being used primarily for the BI and all those things within different organizations. And Excel still is one of those, I think I would rather say, the underrated tools, because people are using Excel very heavily. And then I still believe, yes, and the poll actually confirms that the Excel is almost 75%. It doesn't matter, even after introducing Tableau and Power BI, I still keep seeing that the Excel is one of the most used BI tools. I call it BI tool because it is still being used for the reporting or creating the charts and visualizations, and a lot of the management accountants or the people who are within finance, they're very much sort of familiar with the capabilities of Excel, and then that's what really drives the high usage of Excel. And then even as a common person who is aware of some technical capabilities, they feel they can do a lot of things with Excel. But to use Tableau or Power BI, you need to require the next level of skills. And then R, I think, becomes even harder to use, but I think the benefits using R are actually higher, but it's a very niche and a very specialized skill which you really need to get trained in, and then it has a very niche space where you can use it. And that doesn't surprise me. It's only the 13%, even through our poll, it's only 13% being used by the people who are on this webinar today. So my experience is, yes, Excel is one of the biggest or the most underrated tools within the BI domain.
I personally believe Excel has got a lot of functionality and it's also freely available. That's maybe among the reasons that it is most widely used compared to other tools.
Yeah. Which which I still
Tableau.
propagate that we should be using the enterprise tools to drive the BI and analytics, but Excel still has a space within that, and you can't ignore it. You can't push to the extreme end where you can say that no one should be using Excel because it can't disappear from the scene at all. But anything that we do, we should be cognizant of the fact that Excel is always going to be there. So whatever capabilities we are building or whatever policies around BI and analytics we are developing, we shouldn't mandate that you only have to use Tableau or Power BI because the Excel is still going to live and it has got a big role to play within this whole domain.
Yeah. Do you also think that because all the automation tools can easily do Excel more efficiently and seamlessly compared to Tableau or R, I think it can be the most highly usable tool for analytics.
Yes, it's the versatility of the Excel. Like you can use that as a database, you can use that as a file, you can use that as a reporting tool. It's so versatile that that it does get more and more used into these automation things too. So there are a lot of processes where we have automated things and we actually first dump the data into Excel and then we automate the things. So I think it's undoubtedly it's going to stay there.
Thanks, Harpreet, for your insights on the poll. Now we come to the final session of the live case study and use cases of automation of analytics. And then we have got various questions from the audience which we want to ask you. So I think looking at the time, we have got 12 to 13 minutes on this topic of the live case study and use cases.
I'm happy to spend 20 minutes on this and not have any questions because I'm hoping the questions are difficult ones. But let's try to finish this within 10 minutes.
Sure.
I've just picked up two examples of the two initiatives that we have done, and the first one is the most recent one that we are still doing, and the parts of that process are already in production. They've been improved, and then the parts of that process we are still working through, and it will take us a few months to complete. So this is the challenge we had in our School of Medical and Health Science. Like we as a university are one of the biggest, the providers of the nurses within the Western Australia. So we are known for producing like really, really good medical staff that actually in the end goes to the hospitals and they get the placement over there. But as part of the bachelor degree itself, or I think it is even within the other courses, what people come in when they do the nursing course with us, there's a unit where they have to actually go and a practical training with the medical provider. So, and to make sure the student is fit enough to go to the medical provider, we have to actually go and do the compliance check of a lot of documentation. There could be medical documents and there could be non-medical documents. For example, the student has to be free from n number of diseases like hepatitis B or the HIV or 20 other things. And there have to be non-medical checks like they can work with the children or the police clearance certificate and all those things. So now you can imagine if there are 1,000 students that need to be placed. So someone in the school has to look at all the documentation physically and make sure that student actually ticks all the boxes, and then they have to then manually enter into the system to say that yes, all these certificates have been verified, and they have to put some information about that medical certificate or a non-medical certificate into the system. And in the end, they have to troll through the system to make sure which students have been compliant, which haven't been compliant, and which ones we can send where and all that stuff. It was quite a laborious process, and our school had like 4 or 5 specializations within the school itself, and every specialization had a different process, whereas there was no reason why they should be different. So yes, it was inconsistent across the specializations. A lot of time was being spent to manually verify the documents and how the information was being inputted into the system or how the processes were being run. It was all highly inconsistent. So if you go to the next slide, so that almost explains how the process was being done manually and how we actually brought the automation and analytics into the mix to actually improve the process. So the top part of the slide is actually really showing you the manual process, how it was being done. There were almost 20,000 forms the staff had to go through for all the students collectively, which was medical and non-medical forms. Staff was manually reading all these forms, and then they were actually creating manual checklists to make sure which student is compliant, which is not compliant. And then emails were being sent to the students manually to say, yes, on this date you need to be with this provider, and your placement starts on whatever date. So what we started to do, we looked at all the different types of forms, like especially the GP forms. Like every GP was giving the form in a very different format. So we actually started to create a consistent form that, or one form that we will give to the student, and student is then going to take that form to the GP, and GP was just going to say yes and no. Like we understood there are 20 types of checks or 15 types of medical checks that every student has to go through. So we created a form on our side, and we provide that form to the student that the GP only has to do, tick the checkbox or just say yes and no. And then that is now being fed through the OCR. The OCR is actually reading all those forms, and then we've got like a really good success rate with those ones. And once that is done, the automation is actually then inputting all the information into the source system about all the medical checks or what is expiry date of whatever certificate, whatever those right pieces of information were needed to be recorded into the system. Then the bot's actually going to record all that information. But then what we did was like we actually created the analytical capability through Tableau, where the staff, the professional staff within the school can actually get a report to say, here are the 20 students who are not compliant to actually go for the placement, or they haven't actually submitted XYZ form to you. So instead of going through one record at a time in the system, they actually get an exception report in Tableau that they can actually slice and dice by whatever things they want to do with. And then they get a very focused sort of approach that I now only need to contact 20 students, and they are now able to do their job in a much more effective way. And then we use the bots to actually send the emails out to the students. And once the staff is happy to say yes, all these students are compliant, send the email out. It sends the email out, and then the student starts their placement. So it's a very sort of like a very small part of that whole process, because the process was very, very big enough by itself. But I really wanted to touch on the key aspects of that process, how we actually introduced the automation and the insights or the analytics together to actually really improve the decision end to end. Because at the end of the day, there was only one decision: is the student compliant to go for the placement? That was one decision. The other decision was like which placement agency or which hospital or which medical agency the student is going to go. So once we understood those two decisions, it was very easy for us to start to understand what information do we need to make sure the people can make these decisions. And then we brought, if you go to the next slide, it actually summarizes the whole thing from the decision point of view. So that's where, if you look at the lower end of the slide, that is talking about the data availability. So we started to add far more new pieces of information into the source system to say, if you really want to automate that decision, these are the pieces which are missing, or you're not populating them in the right way, or the data quality is bad, or whatever. So that's where we worked on the data availability side of things. And then that was more around the data flow. So a couple of systems had to be brought together to make sure we get a full picture of what unit student is enrolled into, what semester, the practicum is going to happen. So that data flow was enabled. And then we created a capability within Tableau where the staff will understand the exceptions, and then the task automation happens. So this is how we bring the decision together into that whole methodology or into the framework.
So, Harpreet, I would like to launch one poll, and I will ask some questions to you when the poll is happening. So the poll is that what type of risk you think there can be when you automate analytics part: high risk, moderate risk, and low risk. Of course, it depends upon process to process. But I want to understand your perspective that how the risk were assessed of each process in analytics before they were automated.
I think the risk is always the key thing that we evaluate as part of any process or a decision that we are trying to improve. But the key factor that we really look into is like, are we now trying to do the things in a different way? If we are basing our process or a decision based on the information that was already there, then effectively we're not introducing a new risk in there. But as we start to change the process, we are now redesigning the whole process. For me, the risk level by default goes up, and then we have to really work with the stakeholders within that process to make sure that, are they okay to receive, or are they okay with that level of risk? What things can we now do to mitigate these parts of the risk? We actually then make sure when the automation is happening, we are actually generating much higher level of transparency around that process, so that people are aware how the process is going. Or we have even gone for a couple of processes where in production we have tried to go in production with a very controlled environment. We are only processing the part of the transaction, so that we can evaluate that first how the automation went for that part of the task, and then slowly we incrementally bring more and more tasks of the process into the automation. So we have followed different approaches, but we are always very cognizant of the fact that the risk has to be, we can't underestimate the risk the moment we start to change the process.
I think that's also evident from the poll result, where the majorities want to have moderate risk process to be automated compared to high risk or low risk. Any comments
But
on that poll outcome?
no, I'm actually not surprised with that. But one of the things that I've also noticed is that just because we are automating the process doesn't mean that it is adding the risk. Because if the humans are doing it the same way, and if the automation is going to do it in the same way, then it's not necessarily adding the risk. But I've seen that there's a perception about this, or there's a stigma about the automation, that by default automation actually brings a very high risk to the process. But if you really ask them that how are humans doing it, because we are only automating exactly the same thing what humans were doing. So if that was never perceived to be a big risk, then we need to be realistic about, what level of risk we attach to those processes or the automation or the tasks or whatever you want to call them. So yes, the moderate seems to be the right way for me to go. I wouldn't by default put everything into the high risk.
Thanks, Harpreet. We have got 10 minutes left, so I will go back to our presentation only. So next slide for this.
Yeah, and I'll try to cover this very quickly because I know we don't have a lot of time. But this was one of the first processes that we really started to automate within ECU. This is, as a university, we get international students, and the international students are sent by agents, and there's a whole process to actually pay the commission to the agents. And it was quite a manual process where each and every agent was actually sending us the invoices, and someone within the organization was actually verifying that invoice against 3 different systems, like a student system, a finance system, and a system where the commission rates were being stored. And when I started to look at this process, you can go through, you can read through the issues there anyway, but I'll try to run it very quickly here. When I started to look at the process, for me, there were only 2 key decisions. One was like, how much do we need to pay to the agent? And the other one was, when do we pay it? When is the due date for it? And as far as I was concerned, because from the analytical capabilities, I knew that a lot of that information is already digitized. We know which student is coming from where. We know what is the commission rate. So that's where I said, we can actually flip the whole process. I can actually generate the invoice. The bot can send the invoice to the agent. Because we already have the information. Why are we manually reconciling it? Let the agent reconcile if we have missed a student here and there because our data quality was an issue. And then we sent that process to the agent, like, this is what we are wanting to do. They were actually far happier to have the process this way. But the biggest challenge for us, you can go to the next slide if you want to move it. But the biggest challenge for us in the whole process was the data quality, because now we were almost scaling this whole process to an industrial level. It has got the dollars attached to it. We really wanted to make sure whatever we are committing to the agent, it is financially really, really accurate. And so that's where in the lower end of the screen, what you see is like the process that we had redesigned. The bot actually now goes and gets all the information, and it actually creates RCTI, which is the type of invoice that we are creating and giving it to the agent. So bot goes and collects all that information. Then we actually create the analytical capability within Tableau, where your invoice can go and sit, or the report is sitting within Tableau, and that's what is then picked up by the bot, and bot emails that invoice to the agent. And on the email itself, there's a button to say, yes, I'm happy, or no, I made some changes. And if the agent is happy, the bot picks up that email and creates a whole accounts payable record within the financial system, and it goes to the human for a review, and then bot actually goes and makes a payment. And if agent comes back and says, no, this is not what I was expecting, and they update the Excel that we had sent to them, the bot actually automatically does a reconciliation and says that we sent 10 records and the agent has sent back 11 records. It by default then goes to the human to improve the data quality at a source level. And if you go to the last slide, that's again where we have tried to bring that whole decision thing into one place. So first we worked through the data availability. We added new information into there. We created the data flow between a couple of systems. But once we started to look at the decision from the decision point of view and we improved the data quality, that's where I was saying that through this process, we actually improved few other processes within the organization. People really started to know the performance of the agents. Our contract management with the agents really started to become really, really good. We could actually think of like how we incentivize agents to send us better students or quality students, or how we actually really make sure that the agents get the right level of incentive by if they were sending us a quality students to us. So it really started to flow into different directions of people started to think, now what can we do with this information? So it wasn't only this process that improved, but the data quality helped us to improve far more. Even the planning processes started to become more accurate. Like how do we actually plan our international markets and international trends and students and all that stuff? That started to become even much more improved through this capability. That's all, Mohit. I know we are running late. Are you there, Mohit?
So thanks, Harpreet. I would like to ask you a couple of questions we have received from the audience, and I just want to understand what are the key lessons learned during your journey of automating the analytics part of the process.
I think that's almost my key points on that slide itself. One is that we need to look at the whole ecosystem that enables performance improvement. We can't just look at the automation or analytics as individual capabilities, or we can't just look at the capabilities only. We have to think about the people, process, technology, and even the culture of the organization, the maturity of the processes, the maturity of the stakeholders, or the drivers of the stakeholders of what they are really wanting to do with their own processes. So we have to really look at the broader ecosystem rather than looking at these capabilities individually and thinking that the RPA by itself can bring a big change. It can bring a little bit of change, but I call that as a sugar hit. It'll give you some improvements for a short period of time and then they will disappear. So we have to look at a broader ecosystem. Stakeholder engagement is highly, highly critical. And the more closer we can bring the automation and analytics, the more smarter processes we can start to develop. And the key thing, and I can't overstress this thing, please don't overcommit. Be realistic in what these capabilities can do, what your team can do, what sort of the appetite the organization has got. You have to look at all those factors and don't overcommit. Start with small things, get some small success stories into place before you start to go bigger and bigger from there. That's all from my side, Mohit. Any other question, Mohit? Are you there, Mohit?
Hello, sorry. Thanks, Harpreet. There's some questions. Some more questions. In some cases, there are regulations that says some physical documents being printed and signed for audit purposes. How you audit those process? How you automate those process? I think it is not relevant to this webinar, but do you want to throw some thoughts there?
We still haven't touched those areas. That's all I can say. Like we haven't gone through. We've only touched the areas where those physical signatures were not required. And in some of the processes, people did think that they are required, but we went back to the policies or whatever those regulations were, and we never found the references to those things. So we were lucky in that case. So we were able to automate the process without the physical signature being there. So, but we haven't come through that real process yet.
Yeah. So I think like what we have done for one of our clients is to automate the DocuSign component, where the physical signatures were automatically placed into the document, and you can automate those components easily. But I think like it is much more a question of how to automate than relevant to today's topic. So Harpreet, thank you once again for your time today. Really appreciate you taking time out and sharing your journey with us and the audience. We will be also making this webinar available in the recorded format for the audience which were not able to join us because of time zone issues. This is the first time we had done a webinar where you are not in the same room as I am. Yeah, I think it was not bad. It was very good. It was one of the most well-managed webinar we had in recent time. And I think it's very valuable to understand your insights, that where the process succeed, where it need more improvement, and where it might fail if not done properly. I think it was very insightful for the audience. And please feel free to contact us, audience, like, for any questions you have, we'll respond back to you, and we'll make sure that you have copy of this deck and also the presentation in next 48 hours. Thank you very much, Harpreet, for your time.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mohit. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.